The water was disappearing fast. I watched from my dock as $5 million worth of lakefront mansions slowly emerged from what was becoming a muddy wasteland. Sheriff Karen was screaming into her phone, packing back and forth on her husband's deck that now hung 15 feet above the lake bottom. Her voice carried across the empty water. "You have to stop this. Do something." But there was nothing she could do. Because for the first time in her career, Sheriff Karen had met someone who knew the law better than she did. My name is Robert Mitchell, and for 3 years I lived in paradise. After 35 years as a structural engineer in Chicago, I had finally found my peace on the shores of Crystal Lake. The 20-acre property came with everything I had dreamed of during those long city winters. Clear water that reflected the morning sky like a mirror, pine trees that whispered in the evening breeze, and absolute silence, except for the loons calling to each other at dawn. The only problem was access. My property sat on a small peninsula, connected to the main road by a narrow strip of wetland. The previous owner had used a small boat to get back and forth, but at 62 years old, I needed something more reliable. So I did what any engineer would do. I designed a solution. The bridge took me 4 months to build. 60 feet of treated lumber designed to flex with the seasonal water changes, anchored on concrete footings that I poured myself. It was beautiful work, if I do say so myself. The kind of craftsmanship that comes from decades of understanding how materials behave under stress. Every joint was perfect, every measurement precise. The local permitting office had no problem with it. The bridge crossed wetland that I owned on both sides. The environmental impact was minimal. I even hired a wildlife consultant to make sure I was not disturbing any nesting areas. Everything was legal, documented, and properly filed. Within 6 months, my bridge had become part of the community. Old Frank Morrison used it for his morning fishing walks. The Hendricks family brought their kids over to feed the ducks from the bridge deck. Even the mail carrier started using it as a shortcut to reach the houses on the far side of the inlet. Those were good days. I would wake up at sunrise, brew my coffee, and sit on my deck watching the lake come alive. Sometimes deer would come down to drink at the water's edge. Hawks would circle overhead, hunting for fish in the shallows. The whole world felt balanced and peaceful. But peace never lasts when money gets involved. The first mansion went up across the lake in my 2nd year. Then another. Within 18 months, 5 enormous houses had sprouted along the shoreline like concrete mushrooms. Each one was worth more than I had made in my entire engineering career. Glass walls, private beaches, boat docks the size of parking lots. The kind of places that rich people buy to show other rich people how rich they are. The new residents were exactly what you would expect. Loud boats at all hours. Parties that went until 3 in the morning. Security lights that turned the lake into a shopping mall parking lot. They treated Crystal Lake like their private playground, and the rest of us like trespassers in our own neighborhood. But I minded my own business. I had my bridge, my peace, and my retirement savings. The rich folks could do whatever they wanted on their side of the lake. As long as they left me alone, I would leave them alone. That was my mistake. I thought living quietly would protect me. I thought following the rules would keep me safe. I had no idea that Sheriff Karen was about to teach me how powerless the rules really are when someone with a badge decides they do not like you. I first met Sheriff Karen on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting on my bridge with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water gold, when I heard boots on the wooden planks behind me. "Are you Robert Mitchell?" I turned around to see a woman in a sheriff's uniform walking toward me. She was tall, maybe 45 years old, with short blonde hair and the kind of stern expression that police officers practice in the mirror. Her hand rested on her weapon, even though I was clearly not a threat to anyone except the fish. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "I am Sheriff Corinne Walsh. We need to talk about this bridge." She said it like I had built a nuclear reactor instead of a simple wooden walkway. I stood up, trying to stay polite despite the obvious hostility in her voice. "What about it?" "It is in violation of County Ordinance 47B regarding unauthorized water crossings. You are going to need to remove it." I blinked at her. "Remove it? This bridge has been here for almost 3 years. I have all the proper permits." Sheriff Corinne pulled out a folder and flipped through some papers. "Those permits were issued under the previous administration. We have been reviewing all structures that impact water access and navigation. Your bridge poses a hazard to boaters." That was ridiculous. My bridge was 8 feet above the water at its lowest point. A sailboat could pass underneath it without touching the mast, but I kept my voice calm and reasonable. "Sheriff, I am a licensed structural engineer. This bridge meets all safety standards and environmental requirements. If there is a specific concern, I would be happy to address it." "The concern is that it does not belong here. I am giving you 30 days to remove it voluntarily. After that, the county will remove it for you, and you will pay the costs." She handed me an official notice printed on county letterhead. The language was full of legal terms, but the message was clear: take down my bridge or face prosecution. "Can I ask who filed the complaint?" Sheriff Corinne's expression did not change, but I caught something in her eyes, a flash of satisfaction that told me everything I needed to know. "Multiple residents have expressed concerns about safety and property values." Property values. There it was. I looked across the lake at the massive mansions glittering in the morning sun. One of them belonged to Sheriff Corinne's husband, David Walsh. He had made his money in real estate development before retiring to play golf and sail his yacht around Crystal Lake. "I see. And these concerned residents, do they happen to live in those new houses over there?" "That is not relevant to the safety issues." "Actually, Sheriff, I think it is very relevant. My bridge does not affect navigation or safety, but it might affect how exclusive this lake feels to people who paid millions of dollars to live here." Sheriff Corinne stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her coffee breath and see the anger building behind her professional mask. "Mr. Mitchell, I am going to give you some free advice. This is not Chicago. This is my county, and I enforce the law as I see fit. You can remove that bridge voluntarily, or I can make your life very complicated. Your choice." The threat was clear: comply or face harassment from someone with a badge and unlimited authority to make problems for me. I had heard stories about small-town sheriffs who treated their position like a personal kingdom, but I had never experienced it myself. "I understand your position, Sheriff, but I also understand my rights. This bridge is legal, and I intend to keep it." Corinne folded the notice and put it back in her folder. Her smile was as cold as January lake water. "We will see about that, Mr. Mitchell. We will see about that." She walked back toward her patrol car, her boots echoing off the bridge planks like a countdown timer. I watched her drive away, knowing that I had just made an enemy of the most powerful person in the county. But I had also made a decision. I had spent my whole career solving problems that other people said were impossible. Sheriff Corinne was about to learn that engineers do not give up easily. Sheriff Corinne did not wait 30 days. She did not even wait 30 hours. I woke up the next morning to the sound of diesel engines and shouting voices. Through my bedroom window, I could see trucks, chainsaws, and men in orange vests walking around my bridge like vultures circling roadkill. I threw on clothes and ran outside, my heart pounding with disbelief and rage. Sheriff Karen was standing next to a county demolition truck, clipboard in hand, watching her crew prepare to destroy 3 years of my life. "What the hell are you doing?" Emergency demolition order. The bridge was determined to be an immediate safety hazard. She handed me a new document, this one stamped with yesterday's date and signed by Judge Morrison. The same Judge Morrison whose son worked for David Walsh's real estate company. The same Judge Morrison who played golf every weekend at the country club where all the mansion owners were members. Immediate safety hazard. You were here yesterday morning. What changed in the last 18 hours? New information came to light about structural integrity. That was a lie, and we both knew it. But Sheriff Karen had badges and trucks and men with chainsaws. I had legal documents that apparently meant nothing when rich people wanted something removed from their view. I demand to see this new information. I demand to speak to whoever filed this emergency order. Sir, you need to step back and let us do our job. One of the deputies moved toward me, his hand moving to his belt. I was outnumbered, outgunned, and about to watch helpless as they destroyed the most beautiful thing I had ever built. The first chainsaw started up with a roar that echoed across the lake. Frank Morrison was standing on his dock, watching in horror. The Hendricks family had come outside to see what the noise was about. Even some of the mansion owners had gathered on their decks to watch the show. They cut through the handrails first, then the support beams. Each cut felt like a knife in my chest. 60 feet of perfect craftsmanship reduced to floating debris in less than 20 minutes. "Stop, please, just stop for 1 minute." But they did not stop. The demolition crew worked with the efficiency of people who had done this before. They knew exactly how to take apart a structure without damaging the footings, how to keep the debris from floating away, how to make it look official and legal and proper. Sheriff Karen watched it all with the satisfied expression of someone settling a personal score. She was not enforcing the law. She was sending a message. Cross the wealthy residents of Crystal Lake, and this is what happens to you. When it was over, nothing remained except 2 concrete footings sticking up out of the water like broken teeth. My beautiful bridge, my connection to the world, my 3 years of retirement dreams, all gone in 20 minutes of chainsaw noise and diesel exhaust. "Cleanup costs will be billed to you within 30 days, Sheriff Karen said, walking past me toward her patrol car. "Have a nice day, Mr. Mitchell." The deputies followed her, loading their tools and driving away like nothing had happened. Like they had not just destroyed a man's life for the crime of building something beautiful that rich people did not want to look at. I stood alone on my property, surrounded by floating wood scraps and the smell of chainsaw oil. Across the lake, I could see people on the mansion decks, pointing and laughing. David Walsh raised a champagne glass in my direction, like he was toasting his victory. That night, I sat in my living room with a bottle of whiskey and a stack of legal documents. My property was now worth half what I had paid for it. I was trapped on a peninsula with no reliable access to the outside world, and I had learned a hard lesson about what justice really means when you are not rich enough to buy it. But I had also learned something else, something that Sheriff Karen and her wealthy friends were about to discover the hard way. I was not just a retired engineer. I was a retired engineer with nothing left to lose, unlimited time to research, and 35 years of experience solving impossible problems. They had picked the wrong man to push around. The county record's office was a dusty, forgotten place in the basement of the courthouse. Most people never went there unless they were buying property or settling an estate. But I had time now. Nothing but time. I started with the obvious things: property surveys, water rights, environmental impact studies. I wanted to understand exactly how Sheriff Karen had managed to destroy my bridge so quickly, and whether there were any legal remedies available to me. What I found made my blood boil. The emergency demolition order was based on a complaint filed by someone named Anonymous Concerned Citizen. The structural integrity report was written by an engineer who had never actually examined my bridge. The emergency hearing with Judge Morrison happened at 8 in the morning, before most people were even awake, with no notification to me as the property owner. It was a setup from beginning to end, a coordinated attack designed to remove my bridge before I could mount any legal defense. Sheriff Karen had used her authority to bypass every protection that property owners normally have against government overreach. But the more I dug into the records, the more interesting things became. Crystal Lake was not a natural lake. It was created in 1943 when the Army Corps of Engineers built a dam to control seasonal flooding in the valley. The lake was managed as a flood control reservoir, with water levels that rose and fell based on rainfall, snow melt, and downstream irrigation needs. In 1963, the state sold the lake and surrounding land to a private development company, but they kept the water rights. According to the original deed, the state maintained permanent authority to manage water levels for flood control, environmental protection, and historic irrigation agreements. Those irrigation agreements were the key. Farmers downstream had been using lake water for crop irrigation since the 1940s. Their rights predated every mansion, every dock, every property deed around the lake, and those rights were still active. I spent 3 weeks tracking down the paperwork: agricultural water permits, environmental surveys, historical usage records. Most of it was buried in state archives that had not been digitized yet, but I found what I was looking for. The lake was currently maintained at artificial high levels to protect property values around the shoreline, but legally, it could be drawn down to much lower levels to meet downstream irrigation needs, levels that would leave the mansion properties sitting high and dry above a muddy lake bottom. Even better, the downstream farmers were still paying for irrigation rights they had not used in 20 years. Modern farming techniques and municipal water supplies had made lake irrigation obsolete, but the legal agreements were still in place, just waiting for someone to activate them. Someone like a concerned citizen who believed the lake's ecosystem would benefit from returning to more natural water levels. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time since Sheriff Karen had destroyed my bridge. The mansion owners had built their dream homes assuming that high water levels were guaranteed forever. Their docks, their beaches, their entire property values depended on Crystal Lake staying exactly where it was. But water does not care about property values. Water follows the laws of physics and the legal agreements that govern its use. And I was about to teach Sheriff Karen and her wealthy friends a lesson about what happens when you pick a fight with someone who understands both. The irony was perfect. They had used legal technicalities to destroy my bridge illegally. Now I was going to use legal rights to destroy their lakefront lifestyle completely legally. Justice has a sense of humor sometimes. The law offices of Henderson and Associates specialized in agricultural water rights. Most of their clients were farmers fighting with developers over stream access or irrigation permits. They were exactly the kind of lawyers who would understand what I was trying to do. "Mr. Mitchell, this is fascinating," said Jennifer Henderson, flipping through the documents I had brought her. "I have never seen anyone try to activate dormant irrigation rights for environmental restoration. Is it legal?" "Absolutely. In fact, it is brilliant. The downstream farmers never surrendered their water allocation. They just stopped using it, but the rights remain valid." Jennifer was younger than I had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp intelligence that comes from fighting David versus Goliath battles every day. She understood immediately why I wanted to drain Crystal Lake. "How low can we take the water levels?" "According to these permits, down to the original riverbed. That would be about 15 to 20 feet below current levels." 20 feet. That would leave every mansion dock hanging in midair above a muddy wasteland. Their private beaches would become cliff faces. Their million-dollar lake views would become million-dollar swamp views. "How long would it take?" "That depends on how much water we are talking about and how fast you want to move it. With the right equipment, you could drop the lake significantly within a week." I hired Jennifer on the spot. Within 3 days, she had filed all the necessary paperwork with the State Water Authority. We were requesting activation of irrigation rights for environmental restoration, citing concerns about artificial water levels affecting natural wildlife habitats and downstream water quality. The environmental angle was not just legal strategy. It was true. Crystal Lake at its natural levels would create wetland habitat that had been flooded for decades. Migratory birds would return. Fish spawning areas would expand. The ecosystem would benefit in ways that the mansion owners had never considered. While Jennifer handled the legal work, I contacted Midwest Water Management, a company that specialized in reservoir drawdowns for dam maintenance and environmental projects. They had the pumps, the expertise, and most importantly, the permits to move large amounts of water quickly and safely. "How much water are we talking about, Mr. Mitchell?" "About 40 million gallons." Tom Bradley whistled through his teeth. Tom had been managing water projects for 20 years, and he had never seen a private citizen request a drawdown on this scale. "That is going to cost you." "How much?" $60,000 minimum, maybe more if we run into complications." $60,000 was most of my remaining savings after buying the lake property. But Sheriff Karen had cost me much more than money when she destroyed my bridge. She had cost me my dignity, my peace of mind, and my faith in justice. "When can you start?" "As soon as your lawyer gets the permits approved." The timing had to be perfect. Summer was peak season at Crystal Lake. The mansion owners would all be there, hosting parties and showing off their lakefront lifestyle to impress visitors. Maximum impact required maximum audience. I also needed insurance against retaliation. Sheriff Karen would not take this lying down, and I had to be prepared for her to abuse her authority again. So I hired a private security company to install cameras around my property and a private investigator to document everything that happened. "Mr. Mitchell, are you sure you want to do this?" Jennifer asked during our final planning meeting. "These people are going to be furious. They have money, connections, political influence. They can make your life very difficult." I thought about my bridge, about Frank Morrison's morning fishing walks that would never happen again, about the Hendricks kids who could no longer feed the ducks, about Sheriff Karen's smug smile as she watched my dreams get cut into pieces. They already made my life difficult. Now it is my turn. The permits came through on a Friday afternoon. Tom Bradley's crew would arrive Monday morning with pumps, generators, and enough equipment to turn Crystal Lake into Crystal Puddle. I spent the weekend sitting on my deck, watching the mansion owners enjoy their final days of lakefront paradise. David Walsh was hosting a yacht party with 50 guests. Sheriff Karen was sunbathing on their private beach, probably planning her next abuse of power. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their artificial paradise was about to become a very real swamp. Monday morning could not come fast enough. The pump started at dawn. I watched from my deck as Tom Bradley's crew positioned 4 industrial pumps along the shoreline, each one capable of moving 10,000 gallons per hour. The hum of diesel generators filled the morning air, drowning out the usual sounds of loons and lapping water. "How long before they notice?" I asked Tom. "Water level drops. They will see it within a few hours, but it will take 2 or 3 days before the real drama starts." Tom was right. By noon, the water had dropped 6 inches, not enough to cause immediate panic, but enough for the mansion owners to start asking questions. I could see David Walsh walking around his dock, measuring the water line with a yardstick. By evening, the lake was down almost 2 feet. Boat docks that had been floating freely were now resting on their support cables. Rocky areas that had been underwater for decades were starting to emerge like forgotten islands. Sheriff Karen showed up at my property around sunset, her patrol car churning dust as she drove across the field where my bridge used to connect to the road. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Mitchell?" "Exercising legally obtained water rights. Is there a problem, Sheriff?" She was angrier than I had ever seen her, red-faced, shouting, completely abandoning her professional demeanor. For the first time since I had met her, Sheriff Karen looked genuinely rattled. "You cannot just drain the entire lake." "Actually, I can. I have permits from the State Water Authority. Everything is completely legal." I handed her a copy of the paperwork. She read through it quickly, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is about irrigation. You are not a farmer. The permits allow water drawdown for environmental restoration. Returning the lake to natural levels will restore wetland habitat and improve downstream water quality." "This is harassment. This is revenge." "This is environmental protection, Sheriff. I am surprised that you would oppose efforts to restore natural wildlife habitat." Sheriff Karen crumpled the papers and threw them on the ground. "I will find a way to stop this." "You are welcome to try, but I suggest you contact the State Attorney General's office first. They issued these permits, and they take a very dim view of local officials who interfere with state environmental projects." She stormed back to her patrol car and drove away, probably to call every lawyer and politician she knew. But I was not worried. Jennifer Henderson had made sure that every permit was bulletproof, every regulation followed to the letter. By the second day, the drama was escalating. The lake was down 4 feet, and the mansion owners were in full panic mode. Docks designed for deep water were now sitting on lake bottom. Boat launches were high and dry. Private beaches had become muddy cliff faces. David Walsh organized a meeting at the country club. All 5 mansion owners attended, along with Judge Morrison, the mayor, and several county commissioners. They were trying to find some legal way to stop the drawdown, but they were discovering what I had learned about powerlessness. When you follow the law correctly, when you have proper permits and legitimate environmental reasons, when you are not violating anyone's actual rights, there is nothing corrupt officials can do to stop you. The third day brought media attention. Someone had posted videos on social media showing the receding lake and stranded mansions. Environmental groups were praising the restoration project. News reporters were calling it the mystery of Crystal Lake. I gave interviews to anyone who asked, carefully explaining the environmental benefits of returning the lake to natural levels. I never mentioned Sheriff Karen or revenge or my destroyed bridge. I presented myself as a concerned citizen working to restore wildlife habitat. By the fourth day, the lake was down 12 feet. The transformation was stunning. Decades of hidden lake bottom were exposed, revealing old stumps, forgotten debris, and the original creek channel that had been flooded in 1943. The mansions looked ridiculous, perched high above a muddy wasteland where their million-dollar water views used to be. Sheriff Karen made one more visit to my property, this time with 2 deputies and a very expensive-looking lawyer. "Mr. Mitchell, this is going to stop now." "Actually, Sheriff, it is going to continue for another 3 days. That is how long it takes to reach the target water levels specified in my permits." The lawyer stepped forward. "My clients are prepared to offer significant compensation for you to halt this project." "Your clients should have thought about compensation before they destroyed my bridge." That was the first time I mentioned the bridge directly. The lawyer's face showed that he understood exactly what this was really about. Somewhere behind Sheriff Karen's abuse of power and the mansion owner's arrogance, there was a man who had been pushed too far. "How much?" the lawyer asked. I looked across the drained lake at the 5 ridiculous mansions, sitting above a wasteland they had created through their own greed and corruption. There is not enough money in the world. The story went viral on the 6th day. A drone photographer captured aerial footage of Crystal Lake at its lowest point, showing the 5 mansion properties stranded high above the exposed lake bottom like monuments to misplaced arrogance. The images spread across social media with captions like, "When Karma Meets Lake Management," and "The $1 million Mud View." But the real explosion came when investigative journalist Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News started digging into the background story. She found records of my destroyed bridge, Sheriff Karen's emergency demolition order, and the connection between law enforcement and the mansion owners. "This is not just an environmental story," Sarah told me during our first interview. "This is a story about corruption, abuse of power, and what happens when small-town officials think they can get away with anything." Sarah's investigation revealed a pattern of selective law enforcement that went far beyond my bridge. She found dozens of cases where Sheriff Karen had used her authority to benefit wealthy residents while harassing middle-class property owners. Code violations that were ignored for mansion owners but strictly enforced against everyone else. Building permits expedited for the rich, delayed for everyone else. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered that Judge Morrison had signed the emergency demolition order for my bridge without ever seeing an actual structural engineering report. The document Sheriff Karen claimed proved my bridge was unsafe was created after the bridge had already been destroyed. "Judge Morrison, can you explain why you authorized the destruction of Mr. Mitchell's bridge based on an engineering report that did not exist at the time?" The news footage showed Judge Morrison stammering, sweating, looking like a man who had been caught red-handed in criminal conspiracy. He resigned within 24 hours. Environmental groups were having a field day with the lake drawdown. The exposed wetlands were attracting species of birds that had not been seen in the area for decades. Fish populations were spawning in areas that had been inaccessible for years. What had started as my personal revenge project was turning into a genuine environmental success story. But Sheriff Karen was not going down without a fight. She filed criminal charges against me for environmental terrorism and destruction of property. She claimed that draining the lake had caused millions of dollars in property damage and threatened public safety. She even tried to get a federal injunction, claiming that my project violated the Clean Water Act. Every charge was dismissed within a week. My permits were legitimate, my project was legal, and my environmental restoration was actually beneficial to the ecosystem. Sheriff Karen's desperate legal attacks only made her look more corrupt and vindictive. The final blow came when the state attorney general's office announced a formal investigation into Sheriff Karen's department. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a civil rights investigation into her pattern of selective law enforcement. The county commissioners called for her resignation. David Walsh filed a lawsuit against me for the loss of his property value, claiming that I had deliberately damaged his investment. His lawyer argued that draining the lake was a malicious attack disguised as environmental protection. Jennifer Henderson destroyed their case in court. She presented evidence showing that the mansion owners had never actually owned water rights to Crystal Lake. Their property values were based on artificial water levels that the state had maintained as a courtesy, not a legal obligation. Your Honor, Jennifer argued, the plaintiffs built expensive homes assuming they had permanent rights to something they never actually owned. Mr. Mitchell has simply exercised legitimate water rights that predate their property purchases by decades. The judge agreed. David Walsh's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he could never file the same claim again. He was also ordered to pay my legal fees. Sheriff Karen lasted another 2 weeks. The pressure from state investigators, media coverage, and public outrage finally forced the county commissioners to act. She resigned on a Friday afternoon, claiming she wanted to spend more time with family. Her replacement was Deputy Jim Martinez, a 20-year veteran who had watched Sheriff Karen's corruption with growing disgust. His first official act was to issue a public apology to me and announce new policies to prevent abuse of power by law enforcement. The mansion owners were left with a choice. They could accept their new mudfront properties, or they could sell at massive losses to buyers who did not care about water views. 3 of the 5 mansions sold within 6 months, at prices 60% below what their owners had paid. David Walsh held out the longest, probably hoping I would eventually refill the lake. But I had other plans for Crystal Lake's future. 1 year later, Crystal Lake had found its natural balance. The water level stabilized at about 10 feet below the original artificial high mark, deep enough for fish and wildlife, shallow enough to create the wetland habitats that had been missing for decades. The mansions that remained were still ridiculously expensive, but their owners had learned to appreciate mudflats and migratory birds instead of yacht parties and water skiing. Sheriff Jim Martinez proved to be everything that Karen Walsh was not.